I'm always on the lookout for ways to speed up my workflow without sacrificing quality. So when Cascadeur reached out offering a pro license to their upcoming 2025 release, I was curious enough to jump on the opportunity. If you're new here, hi! I'm Skitty, and I'm a 3D animator. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into getting started with Cascadeur and try out the new features for the upcoming 2025 release. This video is technically meant to showcase the new features for the 2025 release, but given we've never talked about Cascadeur on the channel before, and I've never even actually used the program before, it wouldn't make much sense to jump straight in. So let's learn how to actually use the thing, and then we can look at the shiny new stuff. Let's try to answer the question, is Cascadeur worth adding to your workflow if you're already familiar with other 3D software? If you're already familiar with Cascadeur and would rather skip to the shiny new features and my final thoughts on the software, use the chapters below to skip ahead. Let's start off with navigation when we first open the program. The interface looks like a simplified version of Maya and uses the same navigation method, holding Alt and using left, middle, and right click. If you're more comfortable using alternate key bindings, you can change these in the Settings tab and clicking on Viewport Input Settings or Timeline Input Settings. Let's open a test scene by going to File, Open. For this example, I'm going to choose the Unreal 4 mannequin. If you open your own character and they are facing the wrong direction, make sure to open the Settings tab on the Import menu and select the appropriate up axis. Up in the top right, we have our typical view cube. Selecting each axis will snap our view to it. Clicking the cube in the center changes our camera to snap between a 3D perspective view and a more flat 2D view. We have a few different modes for viewing our character up in the top left of the viewport, which we can expand or hide with this little arrow here. View mode shows us just the mesh, which is ideal to routinely check back to monitor our posing and watch our animation playback. You can get back to this view quickly by pressing S. Next, we have auto posing mode. When we select one of the automatic joints and try to move it, notice how the rest of the body changes too? Auto posing does some guesswork to try to maintain proper range of motion and balance. It doesn't take all control away from you though, and you can still adjust as needed. Any joints that we manually move will become blue, indicating we intend to leave them in that set position. The remaining green joints will be the ones calculated for auto poser. Our transform tools are similar to Maya: Q for select, W for translate, and E for rotate. For some reason, scale doesn't have a hotkey. Maybe it's to prevent accidents, but we can find it with the other transform tools by expanding this arrow on the top left, just under the File tab. To the right of the transform tools, we can expand this arrow to switch between local and global transform modes. Be sure to set a key before trying to pose in auto pose mode, or the character will snap back to the previous position when you let go, unless you press this button here, which switches us from apply changes on keyframes only to set key on change. Setting a key in this mode will have pink keys. This means there are differences between objects on this frame. The difference in this case is that only the foot has been moved, so it's the only object with a key. It will go back to blue when the group is expanded, since you're viewing the individual keys. On the topic of colors, each interpolation mode is represented by a different color on the timeline. Again, mixed interpolation modes will turn that stretch of timeline pink. You can set a key with this button here or by hitting F. This is a hotkey that I'll personally be changing later because I'm so used to S setting a key and F being for focus. We can also shift select multiple joints to move simultaneously or drag select a group of them without having to worry about selecting unwanted things like the mesh. Double-clicking a joint will select all of the child joints in that hierarchy. Right-clicking on any of the selected joints gives us the option to set it as the pivot point for the group, similar to Animbot's temp pivot tool in Maya. Think about what kinds of things you could use this for. A character driving a car or swinging a sword, for example. The steering wheel or the sword can be animated together with the hands to make them feel that much more connected. Expanding the auto posing tool group up here gives us the option to add a joint back into the auto posing equation, which by default is mapped to Shift Z. We also have buttons to force an auto pose update, add or remove auto pose joints to the fingers, and add or remove additional joints. Our next view mode is point controller mode. This is more of your standard view for manual posing. Each point has a bit of IK, or inverted kinematics behavior, as it can influence the rest of the character when you pull a joint away from the body. To move the entire character, drag select all of the joints at once. Next is box controller mode. This mode is used for animating secondary objects like fingers, hair, or cloth. Shift S will switch between point and box controller modes. Joint mode is for viewing the skeleton, mesh mode allows us to select separate meshes for applying textures, and lastly is rigging view mode, to view the character character's rigid bodies. To the right of our viewport, we have our standard outliner listing the hierarchy of every object in the scene. We have a tab for scene settings, a tab for physics settings, and an event log you can track saving actions or any errors you come across. When in doubt, check the logs. Below the outliner, we have a properties panel similar to the details panel in Unreal Engine, giving us lots of options for our currently selected objects. That's a video for another time though. Now let's look at the bottom of our screen where we have our animation timeline. On the left, we have a folder with our scene name. Right-clicking lets us rename it. Beside the scene folder, we have a list of every asset in the scene, which in this example is just the one character. Clicking on the plus icon expands the character to give us a breakdown of individual components. In here, we can hide or lock individual parts. To the right of the tracks is our timeline. We can shrink or expand our view of the timeline with this bar at the bottom. Drag it or jump around one frame at a time with these arrows here. Change the start and end frames by typing in these two boxes here, and quickly add or remove one frame from the head or tail end, that means the beginning or the end, with these plus and minus buttons here. We can also right-click on the bar to quickly view the entire length or keyframes, and right-click again to jump back to our zoomed-in view. Let's start setting some keys. First pose is on frame 0, second pose on frame 10, and a settle pose on frame 15. Key each pose with F. We can move between our poses by clicking on the desired frame, holding left click to drag the red bar, or pressing A and D on your keyboard to shift over one frame at a time. Holding shift with A and D jumps to the next keyframe. These hotkeys can be inverted with this button here, if you'd rather jump between keyframes by default. We can middle mouse drag to shift our key's position on the timeline, or hold shift and middle mouse drag to move a copy of the key. These can also be used for groups of keys. Hitting plus or minus on your keyboard adds and removes a frame between your keys. Alt F is the hotkey for setting and deleting keys along a selection. The timing of your keys can be stretched by selecting the section you want to change and hitting Ctrl T, then dragging to your new desired length. Alternatively, we can activate stretching mode with this button here. In between frames can also be adjusted in this mode. Right-clicking on a frame selects that frame for all objects, and selecting a component, character, or scene selects everything in that group. Now let's look at this button here for creating colored labels on our current selection. Red is default, but right-clicking gives us 5 options, plus an option at the bottom for creating our own labels with custom names and colors. Then we have our Add and Remove Keyframe button if you hate hotkeys. The next button we haven't talked about is this IK button here. This will change the type of kinematics used on the current key. Our options are inverse kinematics, forward, global forward, and mixed. Inverse being the default. This button here expands to show us each of these options as buttons. These same buttons are over here, but these are intended for changing our active kinematics for posing, as opposed to changing modes on existing poses. Interval edit mode is for making adjustments over a stretch of time. Selecting the range we want to edit, hit this button here. Now our viewport has a red border to indicate the tool is active. Now if we shift the body up, the entire motion of that object is shifted up to match. Interval edit mode has its own tangent buttons to edit with the different types. Over on the right, we have our playback buttons and a button for turning loop on and off. Turning loop off will play the animation back once and stop. Let's click this gear here for some timeline settings. In here, we can change things like our starting frame and our frame rate. One handy function in here is called time factor. We can think of this one like a playback speed. Selecting 0.5 will play the animation back at half speed without changing the animation or the keys at all. It acts like a slow preview if we need to take a closer look at how something is moving. Under time, we can change our view between timecodes and frame counts, or disable the upper display. And lastly, we can turn our audio playback on and off. One last tool I'd like to take a look at before diving into the new stuff is the animation retargeting tool. Keep in mind that this tool requires a pro license to use it, and it also only works on humanoid rigs. I'm going to open a new scene and import some mocap data from Rococo to retarget on Cascadeur's default character. When opening a mocap file, it will need to be set up for auto posing before we can use it, so hit yes to enter rig mode. This might take some time to load, so don't panic that the program froze or anything like that. When it's loaded, hit yes to open the quick rigging tool. If your character setup is fully recognized, there will be no manual setup to do on our side, so hit OK. Then click on Add Rig Elements. Now hit Generate Rig, and wait for it to load again. When it's finished, we can watch our mocap footage play out. To copy it, select the range you want on the timeline. It doesn't have to be the whole thing. If frame 0 is a T-pose, consider skipping that frame. Now go to the Edit tab and down to Retargeting Copy. Next, jump to the scene we want to paste it to, and increase the length of the timeline to have enough frames for the new animation. Click on the character track to select the entire timeline, go back to the Edit tab, and select Retargeting Paste. And just like that, it works and is ready for cleanup. This should be enough to get you started with animating in Cascadeur, so let's now move on to what's new for 2025, and then I'll give my personal opinion on the software. The biggest new feature in Cascadeur is the Inbetweening. This is an AI tool, which, yes, I will talk about my thoughts on that word later, that generates motion between two poses. So if we set a starting position here and an ending position here, select the range between the two poses and hit this in-between button, and it will animate between those 2 points, taking into account the speed it will require for that distance. Stretching out the keys and recalculating will slow it down, and shrinking the keys will speed it up. I wanted to see how this works on quadruped rigs, but applying it to the default Sabertooth model gave me errors, so if you had success with the quadruped or even a failure, let me know in the comments below. The maximum number of frames that it can generate between 2 keys is 88. So if you need more than that, just add another pose or 2 in between and then you can generate just fine. With this being the first iteration of the in-between tool, I wanted to put it through a stress test to see what its limits were. It's clearly capable of animating a generic walk or run cycle in between 2 positions, minus the fingers and also no eases or settles going in and out of the action. But what if I made exaggerated poses to guide it? Well, it turns out there isn't much guiding to be had yet. The poses you set are what it's blending between, which, don't get me wrong, is very impressive and will only improve on future releases. But unfortunately at the moment, it can only handle generic motions. To add any sort of personality to your characters, which is super important and you should be doing it, you'll have to do that yourself. Maybe on a layer in Maya after exporting what this generates, or just not relying on the tool and animating from scratch. But that was more opinion than was intended for this section of the video, so let's move on to the next new feature, the autophysics. This isn't technically a new feature, but it has been upgraded. Let's take a new scene with 3 poses as if the character was jumping: starting position, airborne, and landing position. Now let's take the airborne pose and rotate it on an awkward angle. Now we can highlight the duration of the timeline and hit this physics assistant button. A green duplicate of our character will appear with corrected physics. Notice how it removed the awkward angle from our airborne pose? This tool tries to maintain proper form throughout the action, but if we are certain we want that angle in there, all we have to do is go to that frame and flag it as priority. Now it will recalculate a proper action using that position. In this case, it saw fit to add in multiple backflips. This tool is where the physics settings tab by the outliner comes into play. We can play around with some gravity values, which will change the height and spacing of the jump. The default 980 is the equivalent to real-world gravity. Work on interval is off by default. Turning this on will apply the simulation to only the selected interval. Off applies it to the entire timeline. Ghost offset is how far the green physics preview is offset from our actual character. Changing the numbers all to 0 will overlap the two. Rather than typing the numbers for trial and error, we can simply select the preview and translate it around the scene. Below the Ragdoll settings, which we will come back to shortly, are the settings for the autophysics tool. The new addition being the physics corrector slider. This determines how much it's allowed to alter the existing path. 100 gives autophysics full control, which used to be the only option in previous versions, and 0 doesn't allow any changes. Smooth trajectory smooths out the curve of your motion. Smooth rotation smooths out the rotation of your motion. Compensation motion adds body shifts for antics and follow-through. Separation of motion adds natural rotation to unanimated body parts, and secondary motion adds overlap on impact. If you'd like to tweak how any of these sliders behave, there are a ton of options below with parameters to play around with. Now let's take a look at the updated Ragdoll function. In a fresh scene with a default pose, select a start and an end frame, hit the physics assistant button, and turn on Ragdoll. The character will now fall over the length of time selected from the position they were in. Moving the slider to the left will make the character more rigid in their pose. We can add poses throughout the timeline to influence the Ragdoll as well. What's new for 2025 is this option here called constraint touch points. In this example here, we have a cube that moves, a character hanging on it, and a second character hanging off of their feet. The way to set this up is to go to Commands, Add, Cube. Now select the cube in mesh mode, scale and position it how you want, pose your character with points intersecting with the box, and go to the commands again with the box selected, this time clicking Collision Add Box. This gives the box a collision setting in the Details panel, so we can switch it from surface to pin. Now we can move the cube and the root of the character together down the timeline and give an extra key to allow some settle time. With that set up, we can turn on Constraint Touch Points in the Ragdoll menu, wait for it to calculate, and now the Physics Preview mesh will animate a ragdoll with any joints intersecting the box acting like they are pinned. Don't forget that the grid in Cascadeur acts like a ground plane, so if you don't raise the character up, it will drag their feet on the ground. I did try to influence the ragdoll in this mode by adding an arm pose, but well, this happened. I'm not so sure that it's ready for manual inputs just yet. I expect that it will in future updates though, so I'll be holding out hope for that. One neat thing about the ragdoll physics is that by default it will drop any objects the character is holding, but if you select those objects and switch them to FK, they will stay connected. As for the other new features, we now have a context menu when right-clicking in the viewport, the homepage now has a tab for opening autosaves, hovering over commands gives a brief description in some cases, workspaces can now be imported and exported, as well as many other quality of life fixes. So let's go back to that question that I asked at the beginning of this video. Should you add Cascadeur to your workflow if you're already familiar with other 3D software? And well, my answer is that you should only add Cascadeur to your workflow if you're familiar with other 3D software. And there's a couple of asterisks on that answer too. Cascadeur could be a great addition for anyone who needs to clean up mocap data and expects to bring that back into Maya or Blender for cleanup later. It's great for anyone who needs to retarget animation to other characters or radically different proportioned characters, but then expects to bring it back into Maya or Blender for cleanup later. It's great for anyone who wants to quickly generate vanilla locomotion cycles with the expectation of bringing it back into Maya or Blender for personality and cleanup later. Or if you're on a tight deadline and need to animate without spending the time making a full rig, with the expectation of bringing it back into Maya or Blender for cleanup later. Do you get what I'm getting at here? Cascadeur is not a replacement for Maya or Blender, and I don't think it's trying to be either. It has some really neat features that can help speed up specific workflows, but it shouldn't be thought as a Maya or Blender replacement, but an addition to help speed along the process. One of the biggest issues that I have with Cascadeur as it is right now is that every user animation that I see online, you can clearly see that it's animated using IK. I'm not going to show specific examples here and put anybody on blast because that's not the point. The point is, if your IK is visible, your animation isn't done. And if you're not capable of hiding the IK within Cascadeur, then you need to bring it into another program to properly clean it up. And while you're there, animate the fingers. They're more important than you think. So if any of the tasks I've mentioned are a part of your workflow, or if you're looking for some quick ragdoll physics, need a character to realistically hang from another object, or if you're just an indie developer who doesn't want to spend the time learning how to animate so you can move on to your other tasks, that's valid too. Check it out and see if it's a good fit for you. There is a free version available. I do want to stress though that if you're an animator who wants to learn animation and potentially wants to be an animator in the industry someday, do not start here and expect an easy way out. Learn Maya or learn Blender, or else you'll miss out on learning key concepts that are necessary to grasp an understanding of the medium and allow you to actually develop your skills. I don't want to come across like this is a bad tool set, because it's absolutely not, and it has some really promising features for the future. I just want you guys to exercise caution when deciding if Cascadeur is a right fit for you at this particular point in your journey. Maybe it's not for you now, but maybe in a few years when you've developed your skills more, it will be. The last thing I want to address is the big AI elephant in the room. Some of these tools, most notably the autophysics and the Inbetween generation, do rely on AI. Generally, I stand on the side that pushes back against AI, but we do have to accept that it's here and it's not going anywhere, and it will only improve with time. I read something a while back that I can't remember where, but it said, I want AI to do my laundry so I can make art, not make art so I can do my laundry. And I couldn't agree more. It should be used to take the tedium out of our lives so we can focus on our passions. With Cascadeur's AI implementation, I feel that they've done a good job and will continue to do a good job respecting that balance. AI in this case takes out the tedium for things like maintaining proper proper weight distribution, or creating a generic cycle for the 100th time. Again, things you should understand how to do yourself before relying on it. For now, the AI can only handle realism, but don't forget that AI is still in its infancy. It likely won't take very long before it can handle more stylized animation, and we can old man yells at cloud all we want to, but it's not going anywhere. So it's best that we direct that energy to the right places. How can AI be improved to make the creative process more rewarding without taking the art of creation away from us completely? And that's where I'm going to leave this topic for today. Cascadeur has plenty more features that we didn't go over, like the live linking for Unreal and Maya, but hopefully this has been enough of an honest look at the tool so you can decide if it's worth diving deeper yourself. Leave a comment below if there's something you didn't understand, like and subscribe if you learned something, links to socials are in the description, and remember to always use a reference.